Welcome, beautiful people attending this incredible unveiling, breaking through the veil. The darkest night of the year has just passed. There was a new moon. There's all these a beautiful crescent moon with Venus in it. What a wonderful moment for us to unveil, especially with all of the things that are prevailing currently, all the updates on all the challenges that we're facing, the poly crisis, along with all this other stuff happening. What a wonderful opportunity for us to come together around a unifying concept and a beautiful idea that might unify us in a way that we very liminal. Invitation, as I introduce and bring us into this space, I welcome you all to share in the chat where you're messaging from, and also what kind of donut you would love to be. Like if you could be any donut, if you could be, enjoying any donut or become a donut, what donut resonates with you the most? I guess that's also a loaded, kind of complicated question, because sometimes there's pastries that are kind of like donuts, and cultural donuts that are not called donuts, but they're in different cultures. So if you have something like that, that's fine too. Like it could be a cultural donut, right? Culturally nuanced donut. So drop it in the chat, and also keep in heart and mind that when you are writing stuff in the chat, make sure you click everyone. So change the to button to everyone. Otherwise, you're going to be sending private messages to all of us. So make sure you change that to everyone. All right. So before we get started, I have a wonderful gift. I have this beautiful gong that I'm going to play. And the invitation for us when I play this is to, number one, remember that we're all in this bowl together, right? Just to be in that contemplation of the bowl that we're in, and to just take some deep breaths, remembering that we're all in this bowl, whether you call the bowl our cities, our counties, our states, our provinces, our country, the planet. We're in bowls within bowls, and donuts within donuts. So take a few moments to breathe that in, and I'll give you one extra instruction. Remember how important it is for us to come together, to forgive ourselves and our ancestors, but to also remember the resilience within us because of all of our ancestors. To remember that we have the ability to cooperate and cohere because of our ancestors. To remember to make music, to play, to share food, to remember the things that make humanity so beautiful and so resplendent. To remember all of our ancestors, and to remember ourselves as ancestors, future ancestors. May what we do now, what we say, what we do, how we cooperate, may that lead to the truth, beauty, and goodness that humanity can produce. Beautiful, everyone. Thank you for taking some moments, and I hope you guys carry that into this experience, especially after this election cycle that we had. I really encourage all of us to remember that we're in a bowl, we're in a donut together, and that how beautiful would this donut be if there was only one part of the donut? We got to have all the different parts. We got to have all the different kinds of people. We got to have all the different kinds of perspectives. And together, that collective intelligence is so much more potent. So let's lean into building bridges with each other, especially now that we've got the election out of the way. Let's build bridges. Let's create channels of communication between each other. Let's learn how to communicate with each other, maybe through music or food or art, before we do the ideological things. And maybe the ideological things can be something like the donut, which is a wonderful way for us to look at a holistic medical report for our community, our cities, our counties, our states, our countries. What if that's like a holistic medical report? That's neither any ideology. It's actually healthy for us to be able to look at our own health and see what we need to do. I think that's non-ideological. And I think it's also really important to be able to look at our community's health. So I just want to welcome all of us to dream into the potentiality of this, why we're all here together today. And thank you so much to everybody that's a part of California Doughnut Economics Coalition. What an amazing team this is. I'm really excited to introduce Michael as well because, we have somebody amazing that's coming to speak on behest and behalf of us, which is amazing to think about, that we can have a representative like him to see what we're doing and to champion it as well. Michael is a communicator, he's an educator, he's focused on social media being a way to spread ideas for a better economy. His videos on Instagram and TikTok, they support sustainability in ways that kind of I haven't seen anybody else do, which is pretty cool because he connects he teaches about economics and finance, and he highlights systemic ways that climate change is both a difficult thing, but we also can solve it, right? We can create an alternative, and he provides systemic solutions that are really super helpful for us to look at how we can imagine a better future together when it comes to what we're doing. So thank you, Michael, for jumping on here. I really appreciate it. I'm going to hand the donut over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind intro. Wow. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being here. Can everyone hear me okay? You get a few nods. Okay, cool. Thumbs ups. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to take a few minutes to sort of set the stage here. It is a really exciting day. A lot of us are still reeling from yesterday, so thank you for those of you who showed up to this anyway. I think that it's a good time to be with community, and this is a really powerful community. Um, there is a really hopeful message within this presentation, and I'm glad you're all here. So thank you. Um, Real quickly, I think Indy nailed it with the intro. I really appreciate that. My background is I studied economics, went into digital media, and then realized I could use digital media to spread ideas about economics that the world needs. And so I started making these social media videos a few years ago about economic reform and systemic solutions to climate change and all those things, and people seem to like them. So I'm going to keep doing it. Um, the uh, the reason we're all here is for the unveiling of the California Donut. And this is super exciting to me because I'm a California boy. I'm born and raised in LA, living back near home now. I went to Stanford for college, and so I made it up to Northern California for a while. And California is very near and dear to me, and it's also very important for the world and the economy. If California was a country, we would be the fifth largest country in the world in terms of GDP. Now, this group is not super fond of GDP as a metric for for the economy, but it's still a useful tool sometimes to understand just sheer size. So it's big. And what I am so excited about when it comes to the California donut is this is the first time, this is the result of almost a year of research by the California Doughnut Economic Coalition, a lot of the people on this call. And it's the first time we've had a snapshot of California's economy and how it lines up to the donut economics framework. So before the team dives into the details, which are super interesting, and I'm actually very excited because I only got like a preview of what they're going to show. I didn't get to see the whole thing. I'll just do a couple minutes real quickly on, hey, what is donut economics? Why is this important? And kind of setting the stage. So I'm going to briefly share my screen. Here we go. Hopefully y'all can see that. Can everyone see the screen with the big California Doughnut economics slide on it? Cool. So, by the way, as a California boy who loves donut economics, this is really exciting to me to see this slide. I'm like, wow, cool. Um, but okay, what is donut economics? So, I'll be relatively brief here because a lot of you who are on this call probably know, but I also want to be thorough in terms of, why this is important. So, traditional economics has really kind of focused on a few things. It treats the economy as something that is completely separate from the environment, and it focuses on growth as the main goal. So the economy that we're living in today, which is very much a result of traditional economic thinking, is basically saying, okay, a good year means it's a year that the economy grows, And if the environment is impacted negatively, or if there's some sort of social harm that happens, like poverty or, certain people getting left behind, well, we don't really count that, right? That's not economics. That's for social impact people to deal with. Whereas donut economics came along and said, hey, we should tie all of these things together into one holistic view of the economy. So when you look at the result of traditional economics, the chart I often look at is this one, which is global GDP over the long run. So from the 20s until now, the economy has grown a lot. Um, a lot. We are now looking at a global GDP of north of $100 trillion. And looking at this chart, you would think, okay, well, wow, we've created so much wealth that um, surely there must be like a abundant blossoming society due to all of this growth. Gonna switch off the screen for a second just to speak. The the truth is, though, that while a lot of wealth has been created, and we certainly shouldn't, uh, you know, brush under the rug the benefits of the modern economy, um, we have caused a lot of new problems. Um, the I think the most pressing one, at least for folks in the room who are kind of climate activists, is we are pushing up against the limits of what our planet can actually sustain in terms of the size of the economy. I think another super important one is that in a state like California, poverty has become a really big problem. And while lots of people have gotten incredibly rich, there are people sleeping in tents underneath bridges throughout this state. And there doesn't seem to be a way built into our traditional economic model to account for the fact that despite all this growth, there are levels of social well-being that are suffering. And so what donut economics does is it says, okay, is there a way to actually, instead of treating the economy and the environment as two separate things, or instead of treating the economy and social well-being as separate things, can we actually bring it all together into one holistic picture and have an economic model that measures all of these things and tries to calibrate all of them so that we can not only have an abundant society with a lot of wealth, but also protect the environment and protect our families and actually, prevent people from going into poverty and make sure the drinking water is safe and clean and make sure the air is safe and clean and kind of have this holistic view. So that's what I think is so exciting about donut economics. It's the result of many, many years of research, and the result is this donut, which I think is just such a good visual depiction of what an economic model should look like. So what you can see here is that instead of thinking about it as one chart that goes up and to the right, we have a circular and holistic understanding of how the economy is meeting the basic needs of people within the means of the planet. So the way to interpret this chart is basically we want to be in the green part. The green part is the safe and just space for humanity, right? If we go into the interior of the donut, the donut hole, so to speak, that is where we fail to meet the social foundation for human and environmental well-being. So that means, we don't have actually enough wealth to give everyone a high enough standard of living. We don't have enough social equity to make sure that people are safe and actually, protected from whatever may come their way. We have not provided people with their basic needs. Then if you do provide all those things, you get into the green zone. That's where we want to be. But if you go too far, you pass the ecological ceiling, and that's when we get into overshoot, right? So if the economy runs out of control and grows so much to a point that we're actually pushing up against the ecological boundaries of CO2 in the air or ocean acidification or the amount of materials that we're using, then you've gone too far and you're out of the donut. And so the idea is to kind of keep calibrating the economy over time so that you can stay in this green zone. And the last slide I'll show is the more sort of traditional view of the donut that you'll see in academic textbooks, because by the way, there's a ton of great books now about donut economics that, you can actually see the details here. So what are the pieces of the social foundation? Well, clean water, enough food, health systems are working. Do we have enough energy? Are people, educated? Do people have a political voice, etc.? And then on the outside, you have the planetary boundaries, which are the result of a ton of research in the Earth system space around climate change, biodiversity, land conservation, etc. And so this is the idea of donut economics. We are trying to design a model where we can actually keep track of these things and manage the economy according to all of these different limits and variables. And so that's the basic framework. Now I'm about to pass it over to the California Doughnut Economics team who did all this research, but the basic idea of the rest of this meeting is to say, okay, we have the framework, um, and we are now going to use that framework to look at California and see, hey, how are we doing as a state? This massive state that would be the fifth biggest, economy in the country if it was in the world if it was a country. How's it doing? We are a progressive state politically. We like to think that we are doing a good job on the environment and social well-being, but what does the data actually show? And how do we then take that data and use it to inform policy and use it to build movements and use it to actually like move forward in terms of getting California into the green zone of the donut? So that's why we're here. I really appreciate the team for letting me open up and share a little bit about myself and what donut economics is. I'm also very excited to be a part of this community because, again, as a California person and someone who cares about this stuff deeply, it's very exciting that we're taking this big step forward into a world where we have this information and we can use it to inform our actions moving forward. So, thanks. And Della, I think I'm passing it to you, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Michael. Wonderful. Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Indy for the grounding, the arriving, the settling. Thank you to Michael for that overview of what is donut economics. For this next part, I want to introduce the donut development team. So we have Alights, Julian, and Stephanie, and they are the three that are really going to guide us through the unveiling of the California Doughnut Snapshot. A few logistics just to mention that we are recording. So this is a recorded webinar, and we will be sharing the recording with all those who registered, as well as on the Global Doughnut Day platform. So you all got in to be able to view this. So this recording will be uploaded. I see folks are using the chat. Thank you for that. Continue to post your reactions, your comments, and your questions there. We also have a Q&A area. So if anyone has any questions for the Q&A, you can post them there, and we'll have time at the end of the call to address those questions. And then we also have language interpretation available. So there's an interpretation function as well. And thank you to our interpreters for joining us. So happy to join you all. Happy to be here for our unveiling. It is really good to be in community, as Indy said. So we want to start the unveiling with coming from gratitude. We want to really appreciate the land and the more than human beings of California, the flora, the fauna, the fungi, the four-legged, the webbed, all the beings of California, just for their resilience and their strength and their inspiration and their beauty. Really, this work comes from deep love of place and of belonging. So I want to really start with that gratitude. We also want to express gratitude to the indigenous peoples of California, the stewards of the past, the present, and the future, for their work in helping to meet human needs and also stay in right relationship with the needs of our ecosystems and our other than human beings. We also want to appreciate that this work is part of a movement of all the organizations, the policymakers, the people in government, the businesses, the citizens, the activists who are doing the work to get us within the donut, who have got us where we are now in this unveiling and will continue to get us within that safe and just space for humanity, that commitment and those years and effort of movement work. We also want to appreciate donut economics community. So we are really part of a global community. So we have the book by Kate Rayworth, Doughnut Economics. So appreciating Kate Rayworth, but also the whole Doughnut Economics Action Lab team and community. We really are a coalition. So we have so many partners, whether they're our research partners, our data partners, our policy partners, funding partners, and also presentation partners, many of whom are on this call. So good to see you on this call, and thank you so much for joining us and being part of the community. And then finally, just want to appreciate the CalDEC team. So Indy and Alight, Stephanie, Julian, and myself are just part of this team. And so we're grateful to be representing the team, but hello to the team and thank you for joining us and thank you for all the work to create this California Doughnut Snapshot, as well as all of our volunteers of the past, the present, and the future, and our board members and all of our partners. And then, of course, our funding partners too, Cisco Foundation and others who've really believed in us and helped to support this work. So just want to ground with gratitude as we start with our unveiling. So who are we, in case you're unfamiliar with California Doughnut Economics Coalition? We are a 501c3. We were founded as a nonprofit in 2023, although I looked back at my email and found that it was exactly November 6, 2020, that someone named Jared reached out to me on the Deal platform and asked me if I wanted to co-create the first California meetup. So exactly 4 years ago to the day was when the seeds were planted for this endeavor. And we are a worker self-directed nonprofit, and that's really trying to embody the Doughnut economics principles in the ways of our organization. So that's another thing that we're really proud of and really happy to workshop. We are working towards a California where people and planet thrive together, and our strategy is fourfold. We are working to create a new economic narrative for California, that narrative that Michael spoke about, really looking at changing the goal of the California economy from growth to a holistic sense of well-being for people and the planet. We collaborate with existing change makers, really see ourselves as part of a movement and really try to work in partnership. We also spark local Doughnut initiatives and policies. This year, we got to work with folks in San Diego, and we're working with community in San Jose next year for a local Doughnut initiative. And then finally, as we are gathered here today, to share a Doughnut snapshot of California. And that has been really a big part of our work in this first year of our being. So that's a little bit about us. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Julian, part of our Doughnut development team. Julian, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Della and Indy and Michael for the grounding. Yeah, I'll just say we're kind of organizing this presentation as sort of like a funnel type. So we're going really broad with like Michael grounded us in the definition of Doughnut economics and the kind of broader thoughts around it. And we're going to kind of just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I'm going to provide just a little bit of the why we decided to work on the California Doughnut, how we think about the why for the California Doughnut, and sort of frame some of our goals with the California Doughnut. So yeah, starting off with the why, and these two images essentially put numbers to the donut that Michael was describing. So this is like real data that's measuring the social and ecological performance of the global donut, so the entire world, as well as the US donut. And what you see here is a lot of red. So you see a world that is very much out of balance, where we're simultaneously overshooting our planetary boundaries, our ecological limits, while also not meeting the basic needs of billions of people. And so we've, just to kind of make that more concrete, we've transgressed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and we're moving kind of deeper into ecological precarity. So these issues are very urgent. And I think, yeah, I think it's an interesting seeing these images when you focus on the United States, which is the richest country in the world from a GDP perspective. And then, as Michael pointed out, California, which is the richest state in the US, with the 5th largest economy in the world if it was a country. You know, you'd think that we'd be at least meeting the basic needs of all residents of the United States or residents of California. You'll see the US donut here. It looks like we've met almost all of our social foundations. If you look at the inner ring there, it's showing that we're not meeting the full criteria in terms of income equality and employment. But as we'll dive into the California Doughnut later, you'll see that this is kind of giving a false impression that we're performing better than we actually are in the US, because this is a relative study which compares countries all around the world. So in fact, the study uses like for income, to measure income, the study uses $1 a day as the poverty line. And so obviously $1 per day, $1.90 per day in the United States is far below a living wage in the United States. So you'll see that the social foundations in the California Doughnut, as we dive into those, will look much worse. And the fact is that the US Doughnut is much worse also. And that's further research that will need to take place as well. And so, yeah, this is kind of grounding us in, despite this huge amount of GDP, we're still not meeting the basic needs of people in the United States and people in California, really pointing us into a direction of like, we need to be focusing on what really matters, right? Which is meeting the basic needs of all people in a way that's sustainable. And this data and this framework allows us to really focus energy, build movements, build policy in that direction. You can go to the next slide. And yeah, just in terms of more gratitude. So this whole process of working on the California Doughnut really builds from the global community of people all around the world who are applying the Doughnut framework to guide city and regional planning. And so you can see in the map, all those little dots are areas where folks are doing these Doughnut snapshots and applying that Doughnut framework to influence typically planning and policy at the local or regional level. And it's particularly been adopted at the local or city level. And I'll shout out that the California Doughnut snapshot is the first state in the US. So it's kind of, we're excited to be pioneering this work really in the United States, the state level that's working on this. I highlight on the side here, the Amsterdam City Doughnut, which is one of the first kind of major municipal doughnuts that were worked on in collaboration with the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, as well as the city of the city of Amsterdam. And that work has been pretty incredible and is now helping to guide how folks are thinking about city planning in the city of Amsterdam. I also look at the Melbourne as a great example of innovative and new doughnut. There's a lot of great resources online about the Melbourne Doughnut, so I encourage folks to check these out. And then finally, I'm highlighting the Scottish Doughnut because California is much closer to the size of a country than a city. So just to highlight that, other larger scale economies have also done this analysis. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, what were our goals coming into this? And this has kind of been prefaced a little bit. And I'm also giving you a quick preview of some of the deeper dive data that we're going to go into in a second in terms of the California Doughnut. But our goals were quite simple. So the first goal was to just simply measure California's current ecological overshoot and social shortfall. And then the second goal, and this feels important, was to reframe California's economic performance to connect and strengthen policy and planning initiatives, which is really pointing to the fact that we didn't do any original research for this. So we were essentially using research that was already taking place, work that's already taking place to solve a lot of these social and ecological problems in the state of California, and putting them together into one image. And so with the hope of connecting and strengthening that work. So we really want to just acknowledge that there's tons of amazing work happening in the state of California, and we hope this helps to unsilo and connect and strengthen that work. And then also highlighting our key audiences. So we're really focused on influencing state policymakers and planners. Our dream is that policymakers at the state level will start to use this framework and think about how do we think about holistic, multidimensional policymaking in the state of California. And also, as Della mentioned, we're interested in working with cities and local organizers to make sure that folks are using this framework, this holistic measure at the local level as well. And then finally, we're also really excited to partner with educators, I think high school all the way through the graduate level, folks could use this California Doughnut data and the Doughnut framework all together in environmental science and economics courses throughout the state and throughout the country. So we're already starting to build partnerships there. You can go to the next slide. And yes, this is just briefly giving you a sense of our process. As Michael said, this process has taken about a year. We started at the beginning of this year, researching indicators, looking at past Doughnut studies. Lights, who's going to speak soon, helped to compile an initial set of indicators, and then we've, as a team, have worked through those indicators and talked to a ton of external reviewers on data validation. And so those are long processes where we're thinking about, okay, what data is appropriate, making sure that we're getting the appropriate context and data to think about representative indicators that encapsulate some of these very complex topics like freshwater use in the state of California, which is a very contentious topic. And then we moved into drafting, so transforming that data into a report and something that would be legible. And then we're moved into kind of the report review, so working with those external reviewers again to review kind of the more additional context and the report design, adding some dimensions of intersectionality and thinking about justice lenses and a policy assessment as well. And then we moved into design, and today you're going to get kind of a sneak peek of some of the design work that we've been doing, and then publish and promotion. So today is all about the kind of first unveiling of the California Doughnut. So we're really excited to start publishing this and promoting it and working with all of you in the room to expand the scope of collaboration with folks to get this out there in the state of California and beyond. And you can go to the next slide. So yeah, just wanted to quickly highlight some of our research partners, just to kind of ground and show that we've connected with a lot of people across universities, some all around the world to help us with the overall Doughnut, and a lot of universities in the state of California to help our analysis on very specific issues like water and nitrogen and clean water and sanitation and transportation, all these things, as well as California government agencies like the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Toxic Substance Control. We've connected with so many people, and then finally a bunch of nonprofit organizations that are working in this space and have worked for years in this space. I'm not going to go into all of them, but yeah, and this is a non-exhaustive list of some of the folks that we've talked to. And with that, I will pass it along to. Actually, the last thing I'll say on this slide is that we're always looking for more partnerships for research and policy and collaboration. So if you're somebody in the audience or listening to this recording, please reach out to us if you'd like to collaborate. And with that, I'll pass it over to Lights to bring us into the depths of the details on the California Doughnut.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, everyone who's spoken before me. And thanks, everyone, for coming. Yeah, we really hope that this California Doughnut snapshot can serve as a compass to help orient us towards meeting the needs of all people within the limits of the planet. And I'll now explain a bit about that process of compiling indicators which make up the California Doughnut. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So before introducing the final product, the design version, I thought it might be fun to pull back the curtain a little bit and show some of our first attempts at visualizing the Doughnut after compiling the data. So the first one here is from a website that we use, and then the second one is using RStudio. And if we jump to the next slide, you can see the results after working with the design team. The California Doughnut provides an overview of California's social and ecological performance. We'll just pause for a moment to take it in. You can see here we're falling short on 100% of social indicators and overshooting 83% of ecological indicators. Another way of thinking about that is the average social shortfall, which is 36%, and the average ecological overshoot, which is 254%. Now I want to talk a little bit about how we collected these indicators and how we assess shortfall and overshoot before we go into each category in detail. Our process started with a review of previous Doughnut reports, like Julian mentioned, and combining that with existing social and ecological indicators for the state of California. And we considered over 200 indicators and selected around 100 as potential fits for the 20 or so categories that are generally included in Doughnut assessments. And we collaborated with experts from DEAL, the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, also regional experts and local academic, governmental, and non-governmental organizations to sort of like narrow down and improve this list, like Julian was talking about. In the next few slides, we'll dig deeper into what this visualization is really representing. But just to start off, the social foundation is made up of 24 indicators divided between 12 categories, while the ecological ceiling consists of 18 indicators divided into 9 categories. And many of these appear in other reports, but others are specific to the California context. And I think I haven't done an exact count, but around 50% of the indicators are documented by government agencies. Another 30% come from NGOs, and around 20% are from academic reports and peer-reviewed articles. With that, let's dig into the data a little bit. And you can click twice to see our spreadsheets of final social and ecological indicators. So each indicator has a current estimate and a desirable target, which are combined to assess the level of overshoot. So outside of the donut framework, it's quite common to have data points that are not linked to a desirable target, and that makes it quite difficult to assess this overshoot or shortfall. And we try to use aspirational targets that align with the science and also what we hear from the groups we're working with on these issues in California. But we do consider this a living document, and we hope to include updates based on feedback in the future, and this goes for both the targets and the indicators themselves. And you could argue that our targets are a little too aspirational, almost impossible to achieve. This is especially true on the social side, where we generally aim for 100% or 0%. And we don't really see this as a weakness. Rather, it fits with the idea of the donut as a compass. So a compass is always pointing north, but the reason we have a compass is not to take us somewhere called north, rather is to orient us in the right direction. So now we'll talk a little more about how that manifests itself later in the presentation. And for now, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So now we zoom in on the ecological ceiling, and you see a few words to describe each indicator to go along with the general level of overshoot. So now we can see that the climate change category, for example, is made up of 2 indicators: greenhouse gas emissions and renewable electricity. These are abbreviations, of course, and the full indicator descriptions will appear in the unrolled visualization of the donut, which we'll look at in a second. Just point out quickly here that during this research, I found there was really a lack of information related to consumption-based environmental indicators for states like California, which is a large, wealthy state, and many decisions are, of course, made at the state level. So this seems like quite a gap we have in the literature, and also some necessary information to inform policy. Like Julian mentioned, producing new indicators is really beyond the scope of this report. We're looking to compile existing indicators, but this is something we would love to explore further research. And we can go to the next slide, please. And click twice again to reveal the local aspirations and planetary boundaries. So this is a little bit behind the ecological ceiling that we were looking at before. Some of you guys may be familiar with this 4 lenses approach. So here we're considering 2 sides of the ecological coin. One is how our society is matching nature's generosity. This is sometimes called our local aspirations or local ecological. And then on the other side, we have how are our consumption patterns, our society's consumption patterns, impacting nature globally. This is sometimes called the planetary boundaries or the global ecological. So we considered having 2 donuts, one with the local indicators and one with the global indicators. Some reports have done that in the past. In the end, we decided to combine them into 1 donut. Often the easier something is to understand, or I was going to say there's some strengths and some weaknesses to both sides here. And I was just going to point out that sometimes it's easier to understand something when you first see it, then the intricacies are lost. So we tried to find a balance here of being easy to understand, but presenting enough information to make the images meaningful and useful. And in the presentation as well, you'll see how we're digging deeper and deeper as we go on. Here you can also see the year for each indicator. And this is the year the indicator was assessed, not the year the report was published, which is quite a distinction sometimes. But we tried to use the most recent indicators available, but in some cases, there were indicators that we thought were very important to include, even though they're not being measured on a yearly basis. It's particularly true on the ecological side, and we see this report maybe as a way of encouraging our government or other organizations to consider tracking these indicators that we see as vital to our future. And given the state of information, there's sometimes this trade-off of having the best indicator to capture a topic and having an indicator that was assessed in the last calendar year. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So now we see the donut unrolled that I mentioned, the next layer of complexity. So now we can see the % overshoot expressed numerically and also the full name of the indicator that is being assessed. I would say this is the best place to look for hotspots or discern patterns or spot discrepancies between indicators. And we can also see now that greenhouse gas emissions is measured per capita from a consumption-based perspective, and we can see that we're more than 1,000 times over the safe limit. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. You can also see that renewable electricity is measured using % of electricity from non-renewable sources. We're kind of using a gold standard here of just solar, wind, and geothermal being considered as renewable. And as with all the indicators, this is a sort of compromise. If we included hydropower, biomass, and nuclear as renewables, our overshoot would be lower. But if we considered all energy from renewables rather than just electricity, this narrow form percentage of energy, the overshoot would actually be far higher. So this points to the fact that there's a lot behind these numbers, and we try to get into that in our section reports. And we're planning to have one section report for each category to dive deeper into these nuances that are not captured in the numbers. And we'll quickly take a look at one of those now on the next slide. Yeah, we can hear the next layer of complexity here. We see the actual data point for California along with the unit of measurement. So it's 12.1 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per capita. It's per person per year. And we also see the desirable target, which is what we're using to calculate the level of overshoot. In this case, it's 1. In this case, the target is based on downscaling the planetary boundaries framework to a per capita level that's in line with the 1.5 to 2 degree limit codified in the Paris Climate Agreement. But for everyone, it's slightly different how we're measuring that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as when we dive into each category. But in these reports, we try to include some of the indicators related to each category. We didn't sort of make this final cut. We only have 2 indicators for each category, but like I said, we actually considered many more indicators. And we also try to provide additional context and background, mention some of the most important policies related to the issue, and note how things are changing over time. Finally, we highlight inequalities, both within the state and between countries, to understand how power and justice impact these challenges. And the map you can see in the bottom left shows carbon footprint and how it changes depending on the neighborhood you're in San Francisco, with wealthier neighborhoods responsible for most emissions. Meanwhile, countries and locations with the least emissions will be hardest hit by climate change. And thanks to our partners at the Cool Climate Lab over at Berkeley for producing this map and also for reviewing this section for us. And now on to the social foundations. Just take a quick sip of water. So here, I think, as Julian mentioned, we see the greatest discrepancy between the California Doughnut and the National Doughnut, the US Doughnut, which appear on this Good Life for All website. There's amazing studies that have been done by Andrew and the DEAL team. So this research, their research compiles data for most nations on Earth for a range of social and ecological indicators to construct these national doughnuts. And because the national doughnuts use a threshold that are applicable to many nations, it's difficult for them to really accurately capture the local context. Julian used the example of poverty line. It's a good example. And of course, we know that it doesn't work for California. And predictably, this leads to more shortfall than in the national US Doughnut. But this shouldn't really be taken to mean the US is that California is performing below the US average, rather that we're using more aspirational targets that are more applicable to the local context. If we jump to the next slide. And here we can see the 4 lenses approach, again, applied to the social foundation. So this is how is our society meeting the needs of people within California, the social thresholds, and how the society is impacting people around the world through our consumption patterns. And sometimes that's called the global responsibilities. We found these global social indicators actually to be much more difficult to measure than any other category. It seems like it's the least researched and most underrepresented in the donut and also academic literature, at least from a quantitative standpoint. There are some interesting studies that measure appropriated wealth, labor, land, energy, and materials between nations, but none of that has been extended to the state level. And what some other donut reports have done is take a more qualitative approach to this section, looking at how stories of, for example, how local companies' practices like Apple, if you click, you can see Apple, and click one more time to see Tesla. We can think about how these companies treat workers in their factories or people in their supply chains. Or we can think about banks, California banks, investments, and click one more time, and think about how these practices impact climate change, both for local communities and abroad. And if you click one more time, we can also think about how US military interventions are impacting people in other countries. So these are all aspects of how our society is impacting people's lives in other countries. We did not include any global social indicators in this report, but a priority for future reports, at least for me, is to try to capture these global responsibilities and also to provide a time series assessment for the indicators we already have. And now I'll finish off by presenting the social foundations unrolled. Here you can see the percent shortfall and also the full indicator names. And before Stephanie zooms in on each one of these categories, I want to mention again our choice of the aspirational targets of 100%. For this national doughnuts, for the US doughnuts, these ones that we keep mentioning, they use the 95% target rather than 100% target. But in that case, if you think about water quality over here, 2% of people who are not receiving their water quality from systems, 2% of people do not receive their water from systems that meet water quality standards. And if we use that 95%, then that 2% wouldn't be considered a shortfall. But that 2% is close to 1 million Californians who are receiving their water from these problematic systems. So we thought it's important to use that aspirational target and really capture that. Yeah, with that, I would like to pass it over to Stephanie, who will take some time now to walk us through how California is performing in each category and in each indicator.
Awesome. Thanks, Elite. And so now what we're going to do is get in, at least provide a high level overview for each category, and then some additional context throughout many of them so you can get a general sense of how California is performing. And I know it's come up in the chat, but our team will be sharing published details of this and kind of a summary of these pieces and our references next month. So we will have, you can have something kind of like to take with you. And if you have specific questions, just want to encourage you to continue to put it either in the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll try to answer at the end. Next slide. So here we have, let's take a closer look into how California is performing amongst the 12 social foundation categories we've identified. Next slide. For food, we have 2 indicators, food insecurity and vegetables per day. In the United States, food insecurity is the condition in which individuals or households lack reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable and nutritious food. It can manifest in various ways, including worrying about running out of food, reducing meal sizes, or skipping meals altogether. The vegetables per day indicator measures dietary habits and access to nutritious food, highlighting food security in a community. So regular vegetable consumption relies on the availability and affordability of fresh produce. And in the United States, there is a term like we use as food deserts, where access to grocery stores is limited and obtaining a variety of vegetables can be difficult. So by tracking vegetable intake, it can provide an insight into healthy food accessibility and food insecurity levels within a population. Next slide. So health was perhaps one of the most challenging categories to find just 2 representative indicators, since there are so many factors that influence health and it can be defined in many ways. Life expectancy is a very popular indicator around the globe, so we found it important to include to be able to compare with other donuts. And given the US healthcare system and its costs, affordability is our other indicator here. Some other indicators we considered were % of people without medical insurance, adults who delayed, skipped, or reduced their utilization of healthcare due to costs, adults diagnosed with high blood pressure, % of adults reporting no leisure time, primary care physician to patient ratio. And we also considered including representative mental health indicators, such as % of adults reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression, % of people who report feeling very or fairly lonely in the United States, compared to the US average, and then hospitalizations and emergency room visits related to mental health issues. Next slide. For education, here we have literacy rate. So you'll see the % of people over 16 but to 74 that have literacy proficiently at or below level 1. And then we've included student loan debt as an indicator to get a sense of the financial challenges in accessing higher education and achieving economic stability after graduation. It highlights educational affordability, adequacy of financial aid, and potential barriers to long-term success. Next slide. So in the richest state in the United States, 1 in every 5 residents is in poverty. So that's their poverty indicator here. And then Youth NEET, it stands for Youth Not in Education, Employment, or Training. And it's a key indicator here of income and work in California because it reveals barriers young people face in accessing jobs and education. High NEET rates suggest risks of lower earnings and economic instability, impacting the state's workforce and economic future. Next slide. So for peace and justice, we have violent crime and the police scorecard. Violent crime is a pretty significant issue across California. As you can see, we have a 98% shortfall. And including an indicator related to policing practices within peace and justice is about assessing whether all communities are treated fairly and equally, particularly marginalized groups here in the United States and in California. The police scorecard is a platform that rates police departments based on factors such as use of force, racial disparities, and transparency. It provides an average score in these 4 specific areas of the police funding, accountability, violence, and approach to law enforcement. Next slide. Political voice is pretty straightforward here with indicators related to voter turnout and percent of eligible voters who are not eligible to vote. So you'll see our desirable for voter turnout would be 100%, and we have a 43% shortfall. And then registered voters, ideally, there's not any who aren't registered. And so we have a 17.9% shortfall here. Next slide. For social cohesion, we have income inequality and happiness as indicators. For income inequality, we're using the Gini index, which measures income inequality, and higher values show more inequality and lower values showing more equality. High inequality can harm social cohesion by creating divisions and reducing trust in society. So when incomes are more equal, people tend to feel more connected and unified, making society more stable and cooperative. All Californians live in a county that has significantly unequal wealth distribution. Happiness is an area also linked to social cohesion. When people feel happy, they're more likely to engage with their communities, trust others, and build positive relationships, all of which strengthen social bonds. High levels of happiness often correlate with feelings of safety, support, and belonging, and creating a sense of shared purpose that brings people together. In contrast, areas with low happiness levels may experience lower trust and engagement, leading to weaker social connections. And so here in 2023, the Public Policy Institute of California statewide survey found that 26% of Californians reported not being happy. Next slide. For equality, this is based on the Sustainable Development Goal number 10 for reducing inequalities. We've identified gender pay gap. There's a 12% shortfall for gender pay gap in California. And then we're using the Racial Equity Index Inclusion Score, which comes from the National Equity Atlas. The inclusion score measures how a given geography is doing compared with its peers in terms of racial gaps across 9 indicators. And there's 3 categories of these indicators. Economic vitality includes measuring racial gaps in median wage, unemployment, and poverty. Readiness includes educational attainment, disconnected youth, and school poverty. And then connectedness includes air pollution, commute time, and rent burden. So you're looking at the racial disparities amongst white, Black, Latino, Asian, or Pacific Islander, Native American, or mixed or other populations. Next slide. And so for housing, we have the homelessness piece, which is a point-in-time count of unhoused people. To secure federal funding for homelessness programs, California conducts a point-in-time count at least every other year on a designated night in January. This count aims to estimate the number of people experiencing homelessness, both sheltered and unsheltered. The shortfall was determined by comparing how California performs compared to other OECD countries. So in California in 2023, it identified 181,399 people. And this is an increase of 6% from the previous year. And this staggering number represents almost a third of the entire unhoused population in the United States. And California has nearly half of the nation's unsheltered, unhoused people. The situation is further compounded by the fact that California also has the highest number of people experiencing chronic homelessness nationwide, with nearly half of those having disabilities and facing homelessness for extended periods of time. And then the other indicator relates to housing burden. And we have percent of renters with housing costs that exceed 30% of household income. Staying below 30% for housing costs promotes financial security and offers a standardized measure of affordability with some flexibility for local variations. It's a guideline, not a strict rule, but a valuable tool for understanding housing costs. Exceeding this threshold limits discretionary income for essentials and savings and hindering financial security and investment potential. Next slide. Here we have internet access and walking distance to public transit. We're actively researching more representative metrics for transportation access due to this crow's fly issue, which has walking distance measured in a straight line rather than accounting for actual walking routes. So this can overestimate accessibility as real paths may be longer or obstructed by barriers, making transit less accessible than the indicator suggests. Next slide, and I'll pass it to Julian to share a little bit more about energy.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And I realize that we're bombarding folks with a ton of information, so just want to highlight that in the Q&A, we can revisit any of these slides and kind of continue to discuss some of our decisions around the indicators and some of the details. Yeah, so for energy, we have kind of two main indicators that we've chosen. So energy burden and energy reliability. If you're not familiar, energy burden is essentially measuring the percent of household income that you spend on energy. And we put the threshold as at 10% based on the literature. If you're spending more than 10% of your income on energy, that is considered severe energy burden. And 20%, almost 20% of Californians are in that category. And then energy reliability is the second category, which is thinking about things like, folks in California are very, very well aware of the threats of wildfire and outages that can be caused by wildfire and other issues like that, natural disasters. And so this is essentially looking at the percent of populations that are living in counties with a high, and I could go into more of the methodology in terms of how we created that 6 hours or more per year, but that's considered a high amount, well above the average in terms of power outages. And also just mentioning the fact that, and this is kind of trying to blur the lines a little bit between these social categories, because we have an equality category, but in each of these dimensions, there's issues related to justice and equity, and in energy in particular, Black, Latinx, and Native American households, as well as families residing in low-income multifamily housing, experience disproportionately high energy burdens. So that's one key fact related to energy burden. And then also vulnerable and historically marginalized communities also disproportionately are impacted by power outages. So just wanted to highlight that. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then so water and sanitation. So we looked at two things: water quality and sanitation access. And I just had a conversation 3 weeks ago with a water expert from UCLA who's working on the Human Rights to Water project, which is like a big initiative that's working with state agencies in California. So we're really, just to give that anecdote, we're really trying to connect with academics and state agencies that are on the cutting edge of working on these issues. I think Alights mentioned earlier also that, water quality, although only 2%, still represents almost 1 million people living in the state of California, right? So that's one thing to consider when you're thinking about the shortfalls and overshoots. Sometimes that 2%, only 2% shortfall still represents like a really significant number in terms of people not having their basic needs met. And maybe just for time, I'll just leave it at that and pass it back to Stephanie for moving into the ecological ceilings.
Awesome. And I just want to note that in the Q&A, we can respond to you as well while we're doing this, because I know that we're getting close to time. So just want to continue to encourage folks to use the Q&A, and we can respond as well as in the chat. So in taking a closer look at the ecological ceiling, we start with climate change indicators. You can go to the next slide. I want to note as we go through these slides for the ecological indicators, some of them we've highlighted in blue to indicate which of them have a global impact outside of California. You'll also notice we've shortened the sources in this section because many indicators have multiple sources, both to identify kind of California's status for these indicators, as well as the desirable amount based on the literature and the research. So if you're interested in a particular reference, we'll be publishing something next month in December, and feel free to ask and follow up in the chat as well. So for climate change, we have greenhouse gas emissions, renewable electricity here, and the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in California relate to transportation, industry, electricity generation, residential commercial buildings, and agriculture. And while some Californians have carbon footprints below the average, wealthy individuals emit 50 plus tons per year. So just acknowledging the disproportionate impact and emission. And next slide. For ocean acidification here, we have the pH compared to pre-industrial levels, as well as the consumption-based indicator sulfur dioxide emissions per capita, which is one way to measure global impacts of consumption activities in regards to ocean acidification. Next slide. And then for chemical pollution, it has significant overshoots. Oh, I meant to mention that the greenhouse gas piece, that was the highest overshoot across all indicators. And then here we also have some significant overshoots with chemical pollution, and other indicators we considered are microplastic pollution, hazardous waste generated, pounds of waste, statewide recycling rate, and tons of plastic littered, exported, or released into the oceans. So there's lots more to the story here that we could continue to explore, and these are just the two that we've chosen. Next slide. Here we have air pollution, particulate matter, and then we have the O3 pollution. Pretty straightforward here. Next slide. And then we'll pass it back to Julian for freshwater.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So freshwater use in the state of California, if you're from California, you know this is a big issue. So we looked at indicators for groundwater as well as water footprint. And so we looked at groundwater, and for the groundwater data, we used data from the Department of Water Resources, essentially showing that 63% of total groundwater pumped in the state of California comes from basins, water basins that are designated as critically overdrafted. And that designation is part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, if folks are in that world. So that shows that a huge number of our, like, an amount of that groundwater that we're using is from, essentially basins that are extracting water beyond sustainable yield. So those aquifers are being reduced, right? So that's showing that that's not a sustainable water use currently. We did consider indicators for surface water as well, and it's important to note that, and we looked at flows to the SF Bay Area through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, as well as flows in the Colorado River Basin, which are like kind of the two major kind of watersheds or flows in California. Both of them are highly impaired and likely below levels to maintain ecosystem integrity. But that level or that boundary, that specific boundary, is very hard to quantify. It's kind of a political boundary. How much do we leave for ecology, and how much do we use as humans? And so because of that, we didn't want to use that, and it's in the additional context for our longer report. And then the blue water footprint just points to the fact that we're looking at we've combined what Alex was talking about at the beginning, these local ecological measures, thinking about freshwater at a local level, with these global or consumption-based ecological impacts, right? So blue water footprint is essentially how much water we're using, which accounts for imported virtual water. So all the goods that we import to California, they have embedded water in them. There is water to produce the avocados and bananas that we import, and all the other products and materials, and there's also water that leaves California, and so based on that delta is the water that we're consumed, or the footprint of Californians, and based on that measure we're 51% or almost 52% overshooting. So just, yeah, I think that's all I'll say for that. You can go to the next slide.
So for the sake of time, I'm going to omit some of the additional details. And like I said, there'll be more to come. But for the land use change, here we have the forest cover. Again, it's a vital planetary boundary because forests absorb carbon, regulate climate, and support biodiversity and maintain water cycles. And then we also have the ecological footprint, which accounts for human use of cropland, forests for timber, build up land, grazing land, and fishing grounds on the consumption side, and land needed to capture carbon dioxide on the waste absorption side. Next slide. For protected area, we've included both land and sea. The desirable is 50%, which is in line with the nature needs half framework, which is based on research suggesting that protecting at least half of the planet's natural areas is crucial to preventing biodiversity loss, maintaining ecosystem health, and addressing climate change. And then at-risk species is the second highest overshoot across all ecological indicators. And California actually has the highest concentration of species at risk across the United States. And just flagging that for now. Next slide. So ozone depletion is the only category where California is fully within the ecological limits. One of the indicators relate to whether we're compliant with the Montreal Protocol, and the other is related to the global average thickness of the ozone layer. Next slide. And the final ecological indicator here relates to, or category relates to nitrogen and phosphorus. And they are, here we have one indicator representing nitrogen, and then eutrophication, which is the process by which water bodies like lakes, rivers, and coastal areas become overly enriched with nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. And they're essential for life, and these nitrogen and phosphorus are essential for life and can cause serious environmental problems when they're disrupted in terms of the balance of how much there is. And then next slide. And we've touched on some of this with a few of the categories today, but these indicators don't give the full story. And we want to make an important note about equity here, and that these issues that we're talking about do not impact everyone the same. And marginalized communities often face intensified challenges and experience a disproportionate burden. Here's a list of some of the marginalized communities across California, namely starting with people of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, low-income communities, immigrants and refugees, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+ individuals, women and gender nonconforming people, religious minorities, and rural communities. And then I'll pass it back to Della.
Thank you. So thank you so much for that unveiling. And we just wanted to close with the image of the donut here, the California snapshot, and both just appreciate all that we just heard, but also just take a moment to sense into where are you in this donut. So the good news is that we don't each have to do all of this to get us within the donut. We can each do our part. So I know that we're in different areas, whether part of the social foundations work or the ecological ceiling, but where are you in the donut? Where are you working and leading and supporting? So just want to meditate on the donut for a minute, and also to sense into how does it feel to hear this snapshot, this holistic medical report, as Indy said. You know, how does it feel to know how the health of our state is at this moment? So to close, we want to share what's next for us. We are going to be releasing the California Doughnut Snapshot report in December. So we'll be sharing that with folks who've registered for this. Thank you again. We're also launching a San Jose Doughnut Snapshot. So we're hoping to measure what we've done today, but for San Jose. And so if anyone's interested in joining that, you can put your name in the chat or you can email us. And we also have a Give Butter funding campaign for that work as well, that Kali is going to put in the chat as well. And we're going to put the really more detailed California Snapshot report out into the world next year, February, March, spring of 2025. So stay tuned for all of that. Very exciting. So we would love in a moment to hear the questions and feedback and comments, but we would also love for any ways that you can get involved. So please help us to share this California snapshot. Again, we'll be sharing the slides after this presentation, and we'll be sharing the snapshot when it's on our website. Connect us with educators, policymakers, organizers, researchers. We'd love to do more presentations and more sharing and more outreach and more partnering with these key groups, really sharing the donut snapshot and also making sense of what does this mean for our work in the world. You're welcome to volunteer for us. We're a volunteer team, many of us, so we would love to have more support in any and all areas of our work. And finally, if you can support us in any way financially, we are also looking for funding to support next year and beyond. So thank you so much for that. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to Michael, who's going to be leading us in our Q&A. Over to you, Michael.
Hey, everyone. Good stuff. So would it be, I think it's probably most fair to start with the Q&A, folks who have submitted in the Q&A on Zoom. But before I jump into that, I just want to share my overwhelming gratitude for everyone who just presented. That was so cool. As someone who nerds out about this stuff, I was enthralled. Also a little bit alarmed because it wasn't all good news. California has a lot of work to do, but wow, what a really impressive presentation and body of work that you all just created. So thank you. So I'm looking at the open questions here. It looks like there's actually not anything that hasn't been answered yet that's open. Let me jump in if I'm missing something because I'm looking at the questions in the Q&A and it looks like they have answers. But I suppose this is a good time for anyone to actually jump in with live questions. And again, if I'm missing something, team, please let me know. But I'm looking at the Q&A and I'm not seeing any unanswered questions here. I think I'm getting some nods and agreement. So any questions from the audience, just live, turn off your mic, let us know. And if you want to,
I got
raise
a
your,
question. I got a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
I got a question from the great beyond. I have a question. So is this donut, like, is there any way that it can become like interactive or anything? Is there any possibility? Like, how would that, how do you guys envision that?
Yeah. I don't know, is
I
that
can
directed
think
to
of a
someone?
couple of ways. Yeah, I can think
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
couple of ways it could become kind of interactive. So the first and most obvious way is like we have this we've encouraged everyone to come volunteer. So you come be a part of California Donut economics or form your own donut group in whatever city or whatever region you are. So that's definitely a way it can be interactive. And you can also interact with us if you do that, because we can have a meeting with you and talk to you about what we did with data or who we're meeting with policy or whoever specialties that we can interact with you on that. And then in terms of an interactive component, we actually really hope that this report can be online on a website and that the website can be somewhat interactive. So you can scroll your mouse over something and the data can pop up. So some level of interactivity to make this report easier to digest and handle is something we're definitely hoping for in the future as well.
I'll just add to that. I'll share in the chat right now. There's a example of the Melbourne donut, which I talked about earlier, that is nicely interactive, and you can explore it visually. But so far, the first iteration will just have a interactive PDF. But
So we got to start somewhere. I'm gonna speed to the next question because we're running up on time. I see one from John Wynn in the chat. As this progresses, how are we aligning policy proposals with Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Melbourne, etc.? So can anyone speak to the collaboration with other cities at this point, if there is any?
I can start talking briefly about that as well, and then maybe some others can chime in. So we have done some collaboration with other cities really recently. I met with some people in Germany who are doing some work there. I've met some people in Brussels as well, but definitely have done some collaboration with other cities and interested in doing more. Sorry, I just forgot the second part of what I was going to say. Does someone want to pick up, and I'll come back in at the end when it comes back to me.
Sure, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's important to mention that there's this organization, the Donut Economics Action Lab, is kind of recognized as the international convener for everybody who's working on donut economics globally. They're the ones that are hosting this Global Donut Day, and with like specifically. There's a kind of a work stream on policy and local policy, and there's a woman named Xiaoting Hugh Jones who's running their policy program. Yeah, they're essentially creating a space for collaboration amongst various cities and regions who are working on this. So I think probably a month and a half ago, I attended a session where various people who are working on the donut all around the world were able to share their thoughts and how they were using the donut in regional policymaking settings. But like I honestly, we're just the beginning of that work. Right now, we've been so myopically focused on like we just want to get this initial data portion out there and then use that as a foundation for creating connections, internal to California with all these experts, which are hopefully will lay the foundation for our policy work, as well as like connections and sharing stories with folks like Amsterdam and other cities around the world.
And just
so
to
we're
add
just
on
gonna,
to sorry, go ahead. Do you have some?
no, I was just going to say we're just at the beginning of that collaboration, but we're hoping to do more.
Yeah, I was going to just add on to that and say we're kind of avoiding making policy recommendations for this report, although we're looking at past policies and maybe how things have changed over time. But we think we should really do a comprehensive research about policies before we make those recommendations. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in as well, the second part that had escaped my mind.
Awesome. So we are running up on time. Is it okay if we keep going and answer a couple more questions before we wrap?
If we have a
So
few more,
I'm okay.
go for it.
awesome. So real quickly, just a technological update. If you do go to the Q&A area, you should be able to submit questions. You should also be able to view answered questions. So if anyone wants to see the answers to questions in the Q&A, you should be able to view that. If you're having trouble viewing that, let us know. But I'm seeing a question around, for example, in the chat, educational material that we can use to leverage to, educate schools. And Stephanie just dropped a link to that. Actually, Amber and Stephanie both dropped a link. So the chat has a lot of the answers right now. In terms of questions, maybe that are most important to end with, and that we definitely should cover are, number one, when are we able to share the, oh wow, my screen is picking up the thumbs up. When are we able to share the donut publicly? Because I want to be careful not to share that before we're allowed to. And two, what's the best way to stay involved? Probably more importantly, what's the best way to stay involved with this group? I know that that's been answered in text, but it'd be great for someone to share out loud. What's the best way to kind of stay in the loop and following up on the next meetings?
Yeah, I could start. And I think, yeah, a lot of stuff has been shared in the chat. So the California Doughnut Economics has like social media, which would be great for you all to follow us on, whether that's LinkedIn. I think we're on LinkedIn and X and maybe others. And then also we have a newsletter that would be good to get on, so you could get kind of updates from the California Doughnut Economics Coalition. And then, yeah, also if there's like one of us that you're interested in reaching out to, or just the generic organization, if you're interested in volunteering, we're excited to collaborate in many different areas. I also wanted to mention, earlier that we really are considering this as like the V1, so the first iteration of the California Doughnut, and we want this to be collaborative. It doesn't make sense for a small group of people. We've obviously talked to a lot of different stakeholders working in California to create this, but we want this to be a living document that's continuing to be refined and bringing in other interesting dimensions to how we envision a kind of a regenerative and distributive economy for the state of California. So we're excited. We kind of invite you into that process, I guess. And I think that's most of the ways initially. Other people can chime in.
I'll just add that someone dropped a link to the CalDeck website in the chat, and you can use that to sign up for the newsletter, which is probably the best way to tune into future events.
Oh, I'll just mention in terms of those educational materials that were talked about, there's the amazing materials from Deal already, and then hopefully once our report is released in the next month, then that will also be an educational material that people can be using. And yeah, the extended version of the report with the going into detail coming out in 2 months, and then yeah, so different, and hopefully more to come.
All right, y'all, we did it. This was awesome.
Great.
Thank you all so much for presenting this. Thank you everyone who attended. Please do sign up for the newsletter. Please do follow on LinkedIn. There will be more. I really appreciate everyone in the chat saying how they want to help. I definitely want to help with spreading the word too. So this is a big and growing community. So it's really really nice to be a part of it. And this feels like a momentous moment for the group. So thank you all for bringing some sunshine and gratitude and hope into this moment. I at least needed it. So I think a lot of other people did too. And it's just fantastic work. So thanks everyone.
Remember the vibration. Remember the donut. Become the donut. Be the donut. Be one with the donut.